Hi, good evening. So I'm going to introduce His Excellency Sergio Pastrana, our first guest speaker. Born in Havana, Cuba in 1950, he graduated from the School of Letters and Arts of the University of Havana in History of English Literature and Culture in 1975. And he has done postgraduate studies at the Institute of International Relations of the Ministry of Foreign Relations of Cuba. His interests in international cooperation relate to the history of early international contacts of the Cuban scientific community and its influence on the building of national scientific capacity in Cuba, a subject on which he has published and lectured both in Cuba and abroad. He is currently the Cuban ambassador to Antigua and Barbuda. So, His Excellency, I'll let you take over.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you, Samantha. And thanks to the Canadian Network in Cuba for the kind invitation to have me this evening and sharing with you some ideas and experiences regarding the Bay of Pigs invasion and the dimension of that event in the history of the Cuban Revolution. I would like to start on a personal basis, and I must tell you that on that April 15, 1961, when the raids on the different airports in Cuba took place by planes that were sent from the US disguised under the signs of the Cuban Air Force, I was a 10 years old kid living 2 kilometers from one of those airports. And when the raid started, my mother put me and my sister on the mattress of the bed and told us to stay there to protect us from the raid that was going on. And we could hear the machine guns of the airplanes landing all these bullets on our tops, and the telltale signs are there in the walls of the parking area of my home, and for years stood there where the impact of those bullets barely 10 meters from where I was and my sister were sleeping. These raids destroyed part of the Cuban Air Force at the time that was left with only 8 planes that could fly at the time of the invasion. That didn't deter the Cuban Air Force to immediately try to put up in flying conditions all those aircrafts and to be able to take part in the defense of the area that was under attack in Playa Girón. At that time, it was well known the size and the dimensions of the invasion, and Fidel was well aware that this was the start of the attack. As is known at the burial of the victims of that raid next day in the cemetery in Havana, the Colón Cemetery in Havana, in the corner of one very important crossroads there, 1 block from the entrance to the cemetery, there was an act in which the militiamen came, and with arms in their shoulders, they were engaged into the defense of what had been desecrated and the menace that was coming onto the people. I was witness to all of that as a kid, and it impressed me extraordinarily, and I still remember to this day those events that were putting my country on the brink of war. We didn't know the size, we knew it was huge, the invading force, but the decision of those there were practically put into dimension with the photograph of Corda of Chargé that became the most reproduced photograph ever in history. and the decision that was made at the time to announce the socialist character of the Cuban Revolution. That was what these kids and men and women went to defend on the sands of Playa Girón, the place that was invaded by the enemy. We must understand that this was a turning point that made the revolution conscious that there was no retreat, there was no way to go back into the advances that we have already made at the time in the preparation of the literacy campaign, in the work that was done in the agrarian reform, and we knew already the animosity of the United States and the menace that we were facing, but the whole population, I mean, rallied in support of that attack that we were receiving. The operation, as we know, was a fiasco, and in 66 hours, the invaders were dominated by the revolutionary forces that at the time, as I said, were composed the Air Force of 8 planes, and the father of one of the children of my neighborhood, friend of mine, was one of the pilots that was down that day at the sands, but he was the one that was through his plane that was in deadly dive against one of the ships that were coming, and destroyed one of the ships that were coming in the invasion. They could not come to recover those who were surrounded, and all of those mercenaries were taken prisoners, as it is well known. I think that it is very important to recognize that from then on, from earlier days and weeks and months, the embargo started, the attack and the constant limitations of the ability of the Cuban Revolution to develop freely was intensified by the United States. And since that time on, the Cuban Revolution has lived in we should say, a constant state of attack by the most powerful empire that's ever existed, 90 miles away, suffering under a set of measures that no other country in history has had to stand with, support for so long a period. If we take into account that the siege of Troy took 10 years and the whole war 30, we're double that time, and the Cuban Revolution is still there, and will still continue to defend its right to sovereignty, its right to live, and is in its right to continue a path of building a better society for our country.